The Earth was on the edge of collapse. For months, the HFY had been hammering the planet with relentless attacks. Their ships were massive, their weapons powerful, and their strategy flawless. Humanity had fought back, but it was becoming clear Earth was losing. The cities had fallen one by one, and most of the military forces were scattered, trying to hold the line. The capital was a battlefield, and the world watched as the HFY slowly took control. Hope was fading fast. Inside the last remaining military command center, Earth's leaders were gathered around a long round table. The walls were covered in maps and live feed screens, showing cities in flames and ships in orbit. General Thomas Drake, the commander of Earth's forces, sat at the head of the table. He looked tired, his face showing the strain of months of endless battles. His uniform was torn and stained with sweat, a sign of how close they were to breaking. "We've lost almost everything," he said quietly. "Our people are scattered, and the fleet is no match for the HFY's numbers. We need help." One of the civilians, a government official named Maya, spoke up, her voice shaky. "We've sent messages to the other galactic nations. No one's answered. It's like we're alone in this fight." Drake slammed his fist on the table. "Then we fight alone, but we won't give up. We won't let them win." Maya looked at him, her face full of doubt. "And what if they destroy the last of our cities? What if we have nothing left to fight for?" "We have our will," Drake replied firmly. "That's all we need." Across the room, a young officer named Lieutenant Sumir stood watching the screens. He had been part of the last defense in New York City, where the HFY had launched their most brutal attack. He still remembered the sight of the city burning as he barely made it out with his life. The pain of losing so many haunted him, but he knew that wasn't the end. They couldn't lose, not now. "There's no point in hoping for outside help," Sumir said. "The galaxy has turned its back on us. We'll either win this battle on our own, or we'll all die fighting." The room fell silent. Everyone knew Sumir was right, but it didn't make the situation any easier to accept. No one had expected the HFY to be this powerful. No one had expected their world to fall apart so quickly. Earth had always been known for its strength and unity, but now it felt like those very things were slipping away. The soldiers, the civilians, they were all giving their last efforts, but it seemed like it was never enough. Every day they fought, the HFY grew stronger. Drake turned to the officers around him, giving orders. "Continue with the evacuation of civilians to the underground bunkers. The remaining military forces will hold the outer defenses as long as we can. We won't give them an inch." As the officers moved to execute his orders, Maya lingered behind. She walked up to Drake and hesitated for a moment. "What if this is it, General? What if this is the end of Earth?" Drake looked at her, his eyes hard. "Then we go down fighting. We've made it this far. We won't stop now." Just then, an alarm sounded throughout the command center. The screens flashed red as a massive fleet appeared on the radar. But it wasn't HFY, it was something else. Something bigger, something more powerful. The fleet moved quickly, approaching Earth from deep space. Its ships were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, sleek, dark, and menacing, with strange markings that no one recognized. The room erupted into chaos. Officers scrambled to make sense of the new threat, trying to identify the fleet and its intentions. "Is this another HFY force?" Someone shouted. "Did they call in reinforcements?" "No," Drake said, his voice cold and calm. "This is something else." Maya looked at the screens, feeling a mixture of hope and fear. "Who are they?" Drake didn't answer. His mind raced as he watched the fleet draw closer. The unknown ships were massive, bigger than anything the HFY had. For a moment, the thought of escape crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. They had no place to run. The battle was here, and they would have to face it, no matter who was coming. But a strange sense of hope was growing in him. What if this fleet was here to help? What if Earth wasn't alone after all? A transmission came through, crackling across the speakers. A voice, cold and clear, echoed through the room. "This is Captain Terran of the Reclaimer Fleet. We are here to assist Earth. Prepare yourselves. The battle is not over." The words hit like a shockwave. Captain Terran. Who were they? What was the Reclaimer Fleet? Maya's eyes widened. "Do you think they're real?" "I don't know," Drake said, narrowing his eyes. "But we don't have time to question them. Get our forces ready. We're not going down without a fight." The fleet had arrived. But who were they, and could they really help Earth when all seemed lost? As the unknown ships prepared to make their move, Earth's commanders were left with one final question. Was this the salvation they had been praying for, or was it too late for humanity to survive? And just as the first wave of ships entered Earth's atmosphere, the Xelari made their move. The battle for Earth was about to enter a new phase, one that would determine if humanity could fight on or be crushed under the weight of galactic war. The arrival of the mysterious Reclaimer fleet was a moment of fragile hope, but it also brought an overwhelming sense of urgency. The Xelari fleet was already in position, ready to strike the final blow to Earth's defenses. General Drake and his team stood at the command center, watching the enemy forces as they lined up in orbit. They knew this could be their last stand, and they had no choice but to place their trust in the unknown ships arriving to help. The voice of Captain Terran echoed again through the speakers, cold and unwavering. "Prepare yourselves, Earth. We will clear a path for your forces to retaliate. But make no mistake, the Xelari will not go down easily. They are strong, and we must fight with everything we have." Drake clenched his fists. The words were grim, but they also gave him something he hadn't felt in weeks: confidence. The Xelari were strong, but so were the humans. The question was, could they be strong enough? Maya turned to Drake, her face pale. "What do we do now? The fleet is still outnumbered, even with the Reclaimers helping." Drake nodded grimly, his gaze fixed on the screen where the Xelari fleet seemed to shimmer with deadly anticipation. "We do what we've always done. We fight. We make them regret ever stepping foot on Earth." The Reclaimer ships began to move, forming a barrier between the Xelari and the last remaining human cities. Their sleek, dark shapes were like shadows against the stars, and their speed and precision in formation were unmatched. It was clear these ships weren't like anything Earth had ever seen. There were no familiar markings, no clear designations. But the way they moved, they acted as if they had fought countless battles before. As the first shots were exchanged, the atmosphere in the command center turned tense. Explosions rippled through space as the two fleets collided. The silent chaos of space, broken only by the flashing of weapons and the brief transmissions of battle commands. Drake's officers worked quickly, relaying orders, preparing the remaining human ships for combat, and coordinating with the Reclaimer fleet. "We need to buy them time," Drake said, his voice steady. "If the Reclaimers can break through the Xelari's front lines, we'll have a chance to regroup and strike back. Make it happen." He turned to Maya, who was looking over the battle maps on one of the screens. She looked up, eyes wide with worry. "The Xelari won't give up that easily. Their tactics are aggressive, and they won't stop until we're completely defeated." "We know that," Drake said, his jaw tightening. "But if the Reclaimers are who they say they are, we might just have a chance." The battle raged on outside. The Xelari ships, though powerful, were struggling to adapt to the sheer speed and unpredictability of the Reclaimer fleet. Their weapons fired in blistering patterns, but the Reclaimer ships moved like ghosts, dodging and countering with precision that left the Xelari scrambling. For the first time since the war had begun, humanity wasn't the one on the back foot. There was a glimmer of hope, but it was fragile. Meanwhile, Samir, the young officer who had been with the defense forces since the early days of the war, stood by a communications console. His eyes never left the battle screens, and his mind raced through countless strategies. He knew the Xelari's weaknesses. They were aggressive, But they weren't invincible. If they could keep the Xilari distracted long enough, the human forces would have an opening. "General," Samir called, pulling Drake's attention. "We can use the distraction. If we launch our fighters now, we can hit their flank. It'll give us a small window to push through their defenses." Drake turned, eyes narrowing as he considered the plan. "You think it'll work?" "It has to," Samir said firmly. "If we wait, the Reclaimers won't be able to keep the pressure on them for long. We need to hit them fast, while their attention is elsewhere." Drake took a deep breath, his mind working through the decision. The Xilari had been relentless, but Earth had never been one to back down from a fight. He nodded. "Make it happen." As the human fighters launched into the chaos of battle, the Reclaimer ships continued to press forward. Explosions echoed in the void as energy weapons collided with the Xilari fleet. The tension in the command center grew. Every officer was working furiously, each second feeling like an eternity. Maya looked up at Drake, her face tense. "What if it's not enough?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Drake's gaze was unflinching. "Then we fight harder. We've been through worse. This is our home, Maya. We're not going to lose it." The battle outside Earth's atmosphere seemed endless, a swirling mass of chaos and destruction. But amid the darkness of space, there was a small, shining light. Humanity's will to fight. It was more than just survival now. It was about revenge. It was about proving to the galaxy that Earth would never bow to any invader. The first breakthrough came when the Reclaimer ships managed to punch a hole through the Xilari formation. For a brief moment, the enemy fleet was divided, and that was all the human forces needed. The fighters surged forward, exploiting the opening, while the Reclaimers pushed their advantage. On the ground, humanity's last strongholds could only watch as the battle raged above. They knew the fate of the planet hung in the balance. For every minute the battle continued, hope grew stronger, but so did the fear that it could all end in an instant. As the fight escalated, Drake and Maya stood side by side, eyes locked on the screens. They had seen the darkness, felt the weight of the war pressing down on them. But now, there was something different in the air, something that hadn't been there for so long. A glimmer of hope, a spark of something bigger. The battle was far from over, but humanity had found its fight again. The battle in space raged on, and for the first time in weeks, there was a shift. The human fleet, working in tandem with the mysterious Reclaimer ships, had managed to create a breach in the Xilari formation. It wasn't a large gap, but it was enough to give the human fighters a small but crucial advantage. The Xilari, known for their relentless aggression and advanced technology, were now struggling to maintain their dominance as the Reclaimer fleet continued to weave in and out of the battle, acting like shadows that would not be pinned down. Inside the command center, the tension was palpable. General Drake paced in front of the massive screens, his mind racing. He had fought in countless battles, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher, the pressure heavier. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for a future, for their home. The realization that help had come, albeit from unexpected allies, brought both relief and anxiety. How long would the Reclaimers hold their ground? Would they be enough to tip the scales in humanity's favor? Maya stood next to him, her fingers flying across the data console, updating battle reports and coordinating the next phase of their attack. Despite the tension, she remained calm, her focus unwavering. But even she couldn't ignore the question that loomed over them. What if the Reclaimers couldn't hold off the Xilari for long enough? What if this was a fleeting hope that would soon be extinguished? "General, the Xilari are regrouping," Maya said, her voice tight with urgency. "They're not going to let us push through like this. They're mobilizing their reserve fleet from the far side of the moon." Drake's heart sank. The Xilari were never an easy opponent, but this felt like the beginning of the end if they didn't act fast. "How much time do we have?" "Less than an hour, maybe less," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the rising pressure. The reclaimers are holding their own, but they're not invincible. We need to use this opening. Drake nodded, his mind racing through the options. Every move they made could be their last, but they couldn't afford to sit back and wait for the Xilari to strike first. If they were going to survive, they needed to hit the Xilari hard, and they needed to do it now. Initiate Phase 2, Drake ordered, his voice calm but firm. Focus all remaining firepower on their central command ship. We'll break their leadership and create confusion among their fleet. Maya immediately relayed the orders to the fleet commanders. Within moments, the remaining human ships and fighters redirected their weapons towards the heart of the Xilari formation, their flagship, the Obsidian Fang. The massive warship was the symbol of their power, a heavily armored vessel that had led the Xilari to conquer countless planets. If they could take it down, it would shatter the enemy's morale and potentially cripple their entire offensive. On the front lines, the human fighters swarmed around the Obsidian Fang, launching waves of missiles and energy blasts. The reclaimer ships provided cover, darting in and out, hitting Xilari ships from unexpected angles. The battle was chaotic. Blasts of light illuminated the vast expanse of space, creating an eerie glow that reflected the desperation of both sides. Direct hit. One of the communications officers called out. The Obsidian Fang has been hit. Shields are down, but they're still operational. Drake's eyes widened. The Xilari flagship was weakening, but it was far from finished. They had to keep up the pressure. All ships, focus fire on the Obsidian Fang. We can't let it recover. Meanwhile, Samir, still coordinating the fighter squadrons, could feel the weight of every decision he made. Every fighter that launched could mean the difference between life and death. Every shot fired could tip the balance in favor of humanity. The human fleet was small compared to the Xilari, but they had one thing the enemy lacked: resilience. They had nothing to lose, and that made them dangerous. General, we've got another problem. Samir's voice crackled over the comms. The Xilari are launching their own reinforcements from their flagship. They're sending everything they've got. Drake cursed under his breath. It wasn't enough to destroy their command ship. Now they had to deal with the reinforcements. The Xilari were relentless in their tactics, never allowing an opportunity to slip through their fingers. Prepare for a full assault, Drake said, his eyes scanning the monitors. We can't let them regroup. We push forward with everything we've got. The battle raged on, and despite the growing uncertainty, humanity was showing no signs of backing down. The fighters pushed ahead, weaving through enemy lines with precision and speed. The human ships followed suit, launching volleys of fire, each shot fired with the hope that it would make a difference. And then, something changed. Out of the corner of his eye, Drake saw a flash of movement. It wasn't from the Xilari or the Reclaimers. It was something else. A new force had entered the battle, moving at an incredible speed. Drake's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was clear that this was no ordinary ship. A massive silhouette appeared on the battlefield. The new ship was unlike anything Earth had ever seen, its design sleek and menacing, with weapons that seemed to pulse with energy, unlike anything in the human arsenal. Maya, what is that? Drake asked, his voice low with disbelief. Maya's fingers flew across her console, her face a picture of confusion. I don't know. It's not one of ours. It doesn't match any of the Xilari ships either. Before they could react, the unknown ship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. It cut through the Xilari reinforcements with ease, shattering their ships like glass. It wasn't just the power of the attack, it was the precision. Every shot hit its mark, overwhelming the Xilari fleet in seconds. Is that? Samir began, his voice filled with awe. Drake's face lit up with recognition. That's a reclaimer ship. It must be their flagship. It's here. The tide of the battle had just changed. The sudden appearance of the reclaimer flagship turned the tide of the battle. The massive, sleek warship cut through the Xilari reinforcements with brutal efficiency, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. Its weapons, powered by unknown technology, seemed to tear through enemy ships as if they were made of paper. The Exilari, once so confident in their strength, now found themselves overwhelmed by an enemy they had never anticipated. General Drake watched the battle unfold with a mix of awe and disbelief. The Reclaimers had arrived at the perfect moment, tipping the scales in favor of humanity. The Exilari, disoriented and reeling from the unexpected assault, struggled to reorganize. Their ships scattered, trying to regroup, but the Reclaimer flagship followed them relentlessly, its weapons cutting down anything in its path. "General, we're getting a transmission from the Reclaimer flagship," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding on the battlefield. Drake turned to her, his mind racing. "Patch it through." The image on the screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing. The figure that appeared on the screen was unlike any human Drake had ever seen. The Reclaimer commander was tall and imposing, with eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. His voice was cold and clipped, carrying the weight of authority and experience. "General Drake," the Reclaimer said, his tone carrying a strange mix of respect and command. "You have done well to hold your ground. But the Exilari are not yet defeated. Their reinforcements will arrive soon, and you cannot rely on our assistance forever. You must act now before it is too late." Drake's mind spun as the Reclaimer's words sank in. They were in the midst of a fleeting victory, but the Exilari weren't done yet. The momentary confusion caused by the appearance of the Reclaimer flagship was just that, momentary. The Exilari were regrouping, and if they had any chance of securing victory, they needed to strike fast. "Understood," Drake said, his voice firm. "We'll make our move. Thank you for your assistance." The transmission cut off, and Drake turned to Maya. "Get our fleet into position. We're taking the fight to the heart of the Exilari fleet." Maya nodded and immediately sent out the orders. The human ships, bolstered by the appearance of the Reclaimers, now moved with renewed purpose. They had been pushed to the edge, but now they were taking the fight to the Exilari. The remaining fighters engaged the scattered Exilari ships, targeting their weakest points, while the human warships advanced, focusing fire on the Exilari flagship, which was now beginning to regain its composure. Samir's voice crackled over the comms, filled with urgency. "General, we've got more Exilari ships incoming. This isn't over yet." Drake's grip tightened around the armrest of his command chair. "No, it's not over. But we're not backing down." The battle was reaching its climax, and Drake knew that this was the moment that would define everything. The Reclaimers had given them a window of opportunity, but it was up to humanity to seize it. They couldn't afford hesitation. They had to finish what they had started. As the human fleet closed in on the Exilari flagship, the Reclaimer flagship continued its devastating assault, ripping through the enemy lines. But the Exilari were not without their own tricks. As their reinforcements arrived, the Exilari began to adapt, using their advanced technology to fight back with renewed determination. Drake knew they couldn't keep up this pace for much longer. The human fleet had been battered, their resources stretched thin. But if they could break through the heart of the Exilari command structure, they could end this once and for all. They had to destroy the Obsidian Fang, the symbol of Exilari power, and cripple their war efforts. "All ships, target the Obsidian Fang," Drake ordered, his voice steady but full of resolve. "We finish this now." The human fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. The Exilari flagship retaliated with every weapon at its disposal, but it was clear the battle was slipping away from them. The Obsidian Fang's shields flickered under the barrage, and Drake knew they were close to breaking through. The Reclaimer ships moved in to support, focusing fire on the Exilari command ship's weak points, while the human fighters targeted its engines. Every shot felt like it could be the one that ended it all. The Exilari flagship groaned under the pressure, its outer hull cracking as explosions tore through its structure. Maya's voice rang through the comms, her words urgent. "General, we've hit their core. The Obsidian Fang is unstable. We need to pull back before it goes critical. Drake hesitated for a moment, but he knew what had to be done. No, we finish it. We're not retreating now. With one final, coordinated strike, the human fleet, joined by the reclaimers, unleashed everything they had on the Obsidian Fang. The flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the shockwave rippling through the battlefield. The auxiliary fleet, stunned by the loss of their command ship, faltered, their coordinated assault falling apart. For a moment, everything was still. And then, the auxiliary began to retreat. Their remaining ships turned tail and fled, the once mighty fleet now in disarray. The battle had been won, but it had come at a cost. Drake leaned back in his chair, exhausted but victorious. The war was far from over, but today, humanity had sent a clear message to the auxiliary. They had struck back, and they would not be easily defeated. As the remnants of the auxiliary fleet scattered into the depths of space, General Drake stood in the command center, watching the fading lights of the battle. Victory had been achieved, but the weight of it all settled heavily on his shoulders. The cost had been high. Many ships, many lives, had been lost in the chaotic dance of war. Yet, it was undeniable. Humanity had just delivered a crushing blow to one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. Maya stood beside him, her face illuminated by the glow of the control panels. "General, the auxiliary fleet is retreating. We've secured the battlefield." Drake nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the fading lights of the space battle. "For now, yes. But we both know this is far from over." He turned to her, his face a mask of determination. "The reclaimers gave us a chance, but it's up to us to keep pressing forward. We can't let them regroup. We need to capitalize on this." Maya looked down, her expression thoughtful. "But how, sir? We've barely held our own this time. Our ships are damaged. Our fighters have taken a beating. If the auxiliary come back with reinforcements, we might not stand a chance." Drake clenched his jaw. He knew the situation was dire. The human fleet had come far since the beginning of the war, but their enemies were relentless, and the auxiliary were not ones to accept defeat easily. They would regroup. They would retaliate. "We don't wait for them to come back," Drake said firmly. "We take the fight to their doorstep." The idea was risky, perhaps more than risky, but it was the only way. If they could hit the auxiliary strongholds before they could fully recover, they might be able to break their momentum. The galaxy had already seen what humanity was capable of. The auxiliary, however, were not used to seeing humans fight with such ferocity. This time, Drake would make sure they never underestimated humanity again. "Get our fleet ready for a counter-offensive," Drake ordered. "We'll send a message they can't ignore." Maya nodded, though her expression remained skeptical. "Understood, General. But what about the reclaimers? They helped us so far, but we don't know how long they'll stay with us. They have their own goals. What if they decide this is where their involvement ends?" Drake turned his gaze back to the stars, where the final remnants of the auxiliary fleet flickered out of view. "Then we fight on our own. We've always fought on our own. The reclaimers have their own reasons for helping, but that doesn't change our mission. Humanity will rise, Maya, and we will stand firm, no matter the cost." Back in the heart of the warship, the crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of the battle. Every technician, every engineer, and every officer knew that the next few days would determine the future of humanity in this war. The battle had been hard-fought, but it was only a small step in the grand scheme of things. Drake knew the coming fight would be unlike anything humanity had faced before. The auxiliary were down, but not out. They would recover. They would adapt. And when they did, they would come back stronger, more vicious. Yet it was in moments like this, after victory, when the enemy seemed to falter, that true strength emerged. Humanity had been underestimated before, and this battle had proven it. Now, they would show the galaxy that humans were not only capable of survival, they were capable of victory. As Drake watched the fleet prepare, A sudden transmission pinged through the communications channels. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Commander Tyros, leader of the Reclaimer fleet. General Drake, Tyros' voice boomed from the speakers. I trust you are satisfied with your victory. More than satisfied, Drake replied, his tone respectful but firm. We couldn't have done it without your help. Tyros nodded, though there was a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. Indeed, but I must caution you, General. This war will not be won by surprise tactics alone. The Xilari will not forget this day. They will rebuild their forces, and next time, they will be more prepared. You must be ready for that. Drake paused, letting the weight of Tyros' words sink in. I know, Commander. We'll be ready. This time, we won't wait for them to regroup. Tyros looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his next words. Very well. We shall remain in your sector for now. But know this, our allegiance is not permanent. We have our own mission, and when it is complete, we will depart. You will be on your own, General. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The Reclaimers were not offering a long-term alliance. Their help was a temporary gesture, one that humanity could not rely on forever. Drake felt the gravity of that reality, but he pushed it aside. Understood, he said with a nod. We'll handle the rest ourselves. Tyros stared at him one last time before the transmission ended, leaving Drake with only the flickering stars as his company. Maya stepped forward, her face set in determination. We've come this far, General. We'll finish it, no matter what it takes. Drake turned to her, a grim smile crossing his face. We will. Humanity's story is just beginning. The time had come to act decisively. Humanity had proven they were not just survivors. They were fighters. The war was far from over, but now, with their newfound strength and resolve, they would push forward. The galaxy would soon learn that no one, no matter how powerful, could stand against humanity's will to win. The silence in the command center was deafening. General Drake stood before the massive holographic map of the galaxy, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the console as he studied the movements of the remaining Xilari fleet. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, humanity had a chance. The Reclaimers had fulfilled their part, and now it was time for humanity to prove it could stand on its own. Maya entered the room, her expression tense but resolute. General, we've got a situation, she said, her voice sharp. Drake turned to her, his brow furrowed. What's going on? The Xilari aren't retreating, sir, she replied, her eyes flickering over the data on her tablet. They're reorganizing. They've pulled back, yes, but they're setting up a defensive perimeter. Their main fleet is consolidating at 2 of their core systems. Drake took a deep breath. It was as he'd feared. The Xilari weren't done yet. They were regrouping, preparing for a counterattack. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Humanity had struck hard, but they needed to strike again, and fast. Can we track their fleet's movements? He asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. Maya nodded. We've got eyes on them, but their encryption is making it hard to predict their exact course. However, we know their destination. They're heading to a stronghold in the Kaler system, a heavily fortified system with multiple defense stations. Drake's mind raced. If the Xilari were able to consolidate their forces there, they could mount a devastating counterattack. The Kaler system was critical to the Xilari's war effort, and humanity couldn't afford to let them reinforce it. It was now or never. We have to hit them before they settle in, Drake said firmly. We can't wait for them to become stronger. Maya looked at him, eyes narrowing. You want to attack a well-defended system with minimal resources. General, that's suicide. Drake met her gaze. I'm not suggesting we attack head-on. We hit them where it hurts, right at their supply lines. If we disrupt their logistics, we break their ability to sustain the defense. We cripple their offensive before it even begins. Maya hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's risky, but it might work. We'll need every ship we have, and we'll need to move fast. Drake looked over the command room, his gaze falling on the holographic fleet display. Humanity had fewer ships than the Xilari, but they had something more important. They had resolve, and they had the element of surprise. "We're going in," he said with certainty. "Prepare the fleet for a deep strike. We're going to take the Kaler system's supply hubs before they have time to lock it down. We hit them fast, we hit them hard, and we don't give them a chance to recover." As Maya left to coordinate the operation, Drake stood alone for a moment, staring at the map. His mind was filled with the faces of the soldiers, the civilians, the families that depended on the outcome of this war. He couldn't afford to fail. Humanity couldn't afford to fail. The hours passed quickly as the fleet readied itself for the assault. Drake's mind was sharp, focused on every detail, every decision. The Xilari were formidable, but they had underestimated humanity's will to survive and fight back. Now, they would learn just how dangerous humanity could be when cornered. By the time the fleet was ready, the skies over the human stronghold were darkening, and the stars shone bright in the distance. It was time. Drake gathered his senior officers in the war room. "We go in fast. We hit their supply stations first, then we pull back before they can respond. No direct assault on their defenses, unless absolutely necessary. Our goal is disruption, not annihilation." The officers nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They understood the risks, but they also understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was humanity's survival. As the fleet moved into position, the tension was palpable. Every officer, every crew member knew the importance of this strike. It could change the course of the war, or it could doom them all. Maya's voice came through the comms, cutting through the silence. "Fleet ready, General. We're set to jump into the Kaler system on your mark." Drake's fingers hovered over the command panel, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. This was the moment. One mistake, and everything would fall apart. But if they succeeded, they would change the tide of the war in a single stroke. "Make the jump," Drake ordered. The fleet's engines hummed to life as they tore through the fabric of space, emerging in the Kaler system with lightning speed. The Xilari fleet hadn't expected them so soon. They had no time to respond before humanity's ships were already closing in on their targets. The first strike was a success. The human fleet hit the supply depots hard, taking out the smaller Xilari ships and supply lines with surgical precision. But the Xilari responded quickly, scrambling their defenses as they recognized the threat. Within minutes, the human fleet was engaged in a full-scale skirmish. But General Drake had a plan. As the Xilari focused on defending their supply lines, humanity's smaller ships took evasive maneuvers, drawing the enemy away from the critical targets. It was a battle of speed, deception, and precision, and for the first time, the Xilari were on the defensive. "We got them on the ropes," Drake said into the comms, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "Keep pushing forward. Don't let up." But just as victory seemed within their grasp, a new signal appeared on the radar, one that made Drake's blood run cold. A massive Xilari warship, unlike anything they had encountered before, was emerging from the Kaler system's inner rim. It was enormous, its weapons charged and ready to unleash hell. "This is not over," Drake muttered under his breath. The real fight was about to begin. The appearance of the massive Xilari warship turned the tide of the battle. For a moment, the human fleet faltered. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, dwarfing their ships in size and power. The sight of it was enough to send a chill through the entire fleet. General Drake stood at the helm of the flagship, his face pale, but his resolve unshaken. He could hear the voices of his officers on the comms, their panic rising as they assessed the new threat. The warship was closing in, and its weapons were primed to tear apart anything in its path. "We can't win this fight head-on," Maya's voice crackled through his earpiece. "That ship is too powerful." Drake's mind raced. He had always been prepared for the unexpected, but nothing had quite prepared him for this. The Exilari were bringing out their ultimate weapon, and they were doing it at the worst possible moment. But Drake wasn't ready to give up just yet. "We don't need to win head-on. We need to outsmart them," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "Maya, I need you to find their weak point. Every ship has one." Maya paused for a moment, her mind working quickly. "I'll need time, but I think I can hack into their systems. We might be able to disable their weapons or at least slow them down." "Do it," Drake commanded, his eyes never leaving the holographic map. The auxiliary ship was now in range, and the first volley of weapons fire lit up the dark expanse of space. Human ships scattered in all directions, narrowly avoiding the deadly barrage. But it was clear that they couldn't keep up this evasive maneuvering for long. The auxiliary warship was relentless, its weapons hitting with devastating force. Then, just as Drake feared they would be overwhelmed, Maya's voice returned, crackling with urgency. "I found it. Their central energy core is exposed, weakly shielded. If we can hit it directly, we might have a chance." Drake's pulse quickened. It was a small window of hope, but it was all they had. He turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare the fleet for a coordinated strike on the core. We'll need everything we've got." The fleet readied itself, a wave of ships weaving through space, drawing the attention of the massive Silari warship. It fired again, a massive blast that ripped through the blackness, but the human ships dodged, moving in tight formation. Drake's heart raced as he watched the auxiliary ship's weapons recharge. The vulnerability Maya had discovered was their only shot, but if they missed or were too slow, humanity would be wiped out in a matter of minutes. "On my mark," Drake said, his hand hovering over the controls. The fleet moved in closer, the gap closing rapidly between them and the massive warship. "Ready. Now," Drake shouted, and with his command, the human fleet unleashed a barrage of weaponry. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance. The concentrated fire slammed into the auxiliary warship's exposed core, a flash of light blinding everyone on the bridge. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Then the auxiliary warship staggered, its shields flickered, and its weapons fire became erratic, unable to keep up with the relentless assault. Drake knew they had landed the hit. The core was weakening. But the warship wasn't giving up so easily. It retaliated with one final desperate shot, an energy beam that cut through space with unimaginable force. It tore through the line of human ships, scattering them in all directions. "We've got to finish it now," Maya's voice screamed over the comms. Drake's hands gripped the console, his mind focused entirely on the battle. The auxiliary warship was nearly crippled, but it was still fighting. Humanity had no choice now. This had to end. The fleet fired again, their combined firepower focused on the weakening core. And then the unthinkable happened. The auxiliary warship's shields finally gave out, and with a deafening explosion, its core detonated, sending a shockwave through space that rippled for miles. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. It took a moment for anyone to realize what had happened. The enormous warship, the fearsome weapon the auxiliary had used to threaten humanity, was now nothing more than a glowing wreck in space. Drake exhaled sharply, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding through him. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had struck back, and they had won. The auxiliary were no longer an unstoppable force. But the battle wasn't over. The remaining auxiliary fleet, seeing the destruction of their flagship, hesitated. Some began to retreat, while others remained to face the consequences of their failed invasion. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, pressed forward, pursuing their victory. Drake looked out at the shattered remains of the auxiliary warship, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over him. This was humanity's moment. They had shown the galaxy that Earth was not to be underestimated. But as the last remnants of the auxiliary fleet withdrew, Drake knew this victory came with a price. Many ships had been lost. Many lives had been sacrificed. Yet in the end, humanity had answered the call. The war was far from over, but the Xilari would never forget the day they learned not to underestimate the resolve of Earth's defenders. And as the fleet began to regroup, Drake could see the signs of something bigger on the horizon. A new era for humanity, one where Earth would no longer be the underdog, but a force to be reckoned with across the stars.